Hey guys, so we've been talking about E3 a lot recently, obviously, because we're getting close to it. We're less than 2 weeks away now from E3, which is pretty exciting. And now we have a finalized floor plan, which is pretty cool because we can look at where all the companies are going to be, how much space they have, which sometimes can be kind of telling as to how many games they have to show, or what their plans are for tournaments or stuff. In this case, though, we can see where Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft all are and how much space they have. So let's take a quick look at it right here, guys. We have the South Hall, which is right now it looks like where they are putting most of like the third-party companies, for example. Bethesda has a decent-sized booth, Warner Brothers, Ubisoft, Capcom, Square, Activision, and then, strangely, Microsoft. Now, Microsoft is there because it looks like they have a pretty small area compared to the other two companies in Nintendo and Sony, so much so that it appears they have half the size of someone like Nintendo, which is interesting because they're showing a full system there. It's Scorpio. Now, they are doing their conference, their initial one, kind of off-site at a different place, so maybe they don't need as much space because they don't plan to show a lot of first-party titles like we've all kind of thought. They have to show Crackdown 3, obviously. I'm sure they'll show Cuphead, and then maybe a new first-person shooter or something that they announce. But for the most part, I still think Microsoft is going to be leaning heavily on third parties. And when you see the other two companies' booths, it becomes pretty evident. Now, this is pretty cool because somebody over on NeoGAF was kind enough to kind of summarize and bring everything together to make this very easy for us to look at. So, obviously, the big ones in the South Hall you see here are Activision, Microsoft, Warner Brothers, Ubisoft, Bethesda, like I said before, and then Bandai Namco are kind of rounding that out. So let's scroll down here to the West Hall where Nintendo and Sony are located. Now, you'll see Sony here has a pretty good size. 4322 is their booth number there, 4822 directly across from them. And this is interesting, isn't it? Because it used to be Sony and Microsoft, battling it out. You'd see those pictures where people be walking down a hall and there'd be Xbox on one side and Sony on the other, big pictures glowing. Not the case anymore. It's almost Nintendo versus Sony now, which is interesting. And again, if you look over here, you have two booths for Nintendo. That's probably just the layout that they had, unfortunately. They had to say, look, you get two booths right next to each other. And what's interesting is Nvidia is kind of hanging out in there with them. So it's kind of funny. I feel like Nintendo will probably have Nvidia signs or some kind of Nvidia marketing in their booth next to their Switch because Nvidia is a pretty reputable company, and why not? You're using their chip, put their logo in your booth. I'm sure Nvidia will be putting over the Switch a lot too, since they're in there as well, and that's a big moneymaker for them as they've shown. Sony is also getting quite a bit of space. Sony is renting out the most space currently at E3, with Nintendo right behind them, and then Microsoft kind of way in the back. In fact, if we scroll down here, also Atlas and Sega has a nice little spot there next to Sony. If we scroll down here, the very kind person here also managed to kind of summarize all the numbers for each company. So let's scroll down here past the concourse level where they have like Media Hospitality Lounge, Media Center, and then they have some meeting areas where Sony has mostly rented out as well. Down, though, you could see we have Microsoft in the West Hall, of course, how we saw that. They have booths ranging from 15,000 square feet, which is the normal one we saw, and then another booth of 900 square feet. And they have a few other ones here that are elsewhere. According to them, it's unknown to them, but they have one at 364 square feet and then 1,148, which gives them a total of 17,412 square feet, which is pretty small. That's not normal. That seems smaller than usual for Microsoft. Again, we look down at Nintendo's right here in the West Hall. They have a couple booths. For example, the 4822 we saw is 20,000 square feet. Right off the bat, that one booth is more than Microsoft has completely between everything. They also have another booth at 5244 at 9,900 square feet. That's the one directly next to it that we saw. Booth 5636, 400 square feet, down from there 2,100 square feet at 5644 for a total space along with their theater room that they have rented out to kind of give a presentation to investors and other media. At 32,400 square feet, might be a little more depending on if you round or if there's any media like meeting rooms they have not disclosed yet. So that right away is pretty large. I mean, that's a pretty big spot right there for Nintendo, almost double of what Microsoft has total. And then we go down to Sony, who has a good bit of space locked down, as they should, considering they will have the majority of third parties to show off, their first party support, and then of course they have things like Destiny 2 and Call of Duty that they have marketing stakes in. So they want to show that as well and show off why they are, on those marketing aspects, whether they get DLC first, things like that. So they'll be showcasing a lot of that also, but they add all the way up to 43,500 square feet, probably a little more depending on meeting rooms that have been missed here. And they have 4 booths that are large enough at 6,000, 2,700, 30,000, and 4,800. And this gets to a point, guys, where I think it's going to be a Nintendo versus Sony E3. It's going to be a 2-horse race pretty much between the consoles. Microsoft showing up with their system, and I feel like that might be all they really show up with. Maybe they show up with a new IP like a first-person shooter, which would make sense because, let's face it, their crowd likes first-person shooters, and that's fine. You're allowed to like first-person shooters, but I have a feeling they're going to go in there and heavily lean on the third parties, whereas Nintendo and Sony have very large areas for, probably they're going to do some tournaments as well, but very large areas for things that they are trying to sell us, which probably will be more first-party titles than Microsoft could ever dream of, at least in the past couple of years. So look for a big push from Sony and Nintendo. Definitely Sony, because they are definitely entering the last years of their PS4, and they want to get as much money as they can out of any of the games and licensing fees. Microsoft, I think, is just ready for this generation to be over, and Nintendo's, of course, is technically just starting. So I'm excited for E3. It's going to be great. Nintendo versus Sony this year. The past couple years, obviously, it was supposed to be Microsoft versus Sony, and that's kind of fallen off. So good on them. Seriously, this will be really fun, I think, and I'm looking forward to any of the big announcements. Some are already starting right now, which you'll see on Newswave going forward. So keep an eye out, guys. I just wanted to give you a look at the floor plan. There is a full interactive floor plan you can look at yourself. I'll put a link to that down in the description, so you can check that out for yourself. I think it's like Flash-based. You click and then go to all the different floor plans. Definitely check it out if you're actually going. I wish I could go next year maybe, but that's it for now, guys. I will see you next time.